Most people lie, sometimes to avoid conflict, sometimes to protect themselves, sometimes to make a better impression. But there is another type of liar, a person who lies when there is nothing to gain. They lie about small things, big things, important things, meaningless things. Sometimes they lie even when the truth would work just as well. Why would someone do that? The answer is more complicated than most people think. A pathological liar is someone who lies habitually and repeatedly. For them, lying isn't just a strategy. It becomes a pattern, almost a reflex. Over time, the boundary between truth and fiction can become surprisingly blurred. This doesn't mean they are always aware of what they're doing. Some lies are deliberate. Others happen almost automatically. The behavior becomes part of how they navigate the world. One reason people lie excessively is control. The truth is unpredictable. Reality cannot be edited, but a story can. A lie allows someone to shape how others see them. They can appear more successful, more interesting, more important, more victimized, more admired. The lie becomes a tool for controlling perception. And for some people, perception becomes more important than reality itself. Many pathological liars are not driven by confidence. They're driven by insecurity. Deep down, they may believe that who they really are is not enough. So they create a version of themselves that feels more acceptable, more impressive, more worthy of attention. Every lie becomes a temporary escape from feelings they don't want to face. The problem is that the relief never lasts, which means the lies continue, and often become larger over time. In some cases, excessive lying begins early. Children quickly learn what helps them avoid punishment, gain approval, or survive difficult environments. If honesty repeatedly leads to pain, while deception provides safety, the brain learns a lesson. Lying works. Years later, the environment may change, but the habit remains. What once served as protection becomes an automatic coping mechanism. Some pathological liars are searching for something else: attention, recognition, validation. They tell dramatic stories, exaggerate experiences, or invent events entirely. Not necessarily for money, not necessarily for power, but because being noticed feels rewarding. For a brief moment, the lie creates the connection they crave. One of the strangest questions is whether pathological liars believe what they say. The answer is sometimes. Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. When a story is repeated enough times, parts of it can begin to feel real. Details become distorted. Facts become mixed with imagination. The person may not be consciously deceiving at every moment. They may be living inside a narrative they helped create. You might wonder, why do people keep believing pathological liars? Because most people assume honesty. Human relationships depend on trust. We don't expect every conversation to be a performance. Pathological liars often exploit this assumption, especially when they are charismatic, confident, or emotionally convincing. Ironically, confidence often makes people appear more truthful, even when they aren't. Lying can solve a problem in the moment, but it creates new problems over time. Relationships become fragile. Trust disappears. The liar must remember previous stories. Contradictions begin to appear, and eventually maintaining the false reality becomes exhausting. The person may feel trapped inside a version of themselves they no longer know how to escape. Pathological lying is rarely just about deception. It's often about fear, insecurity, control, validation, or habits that developed long ago. Behind many lies is a person trying to manage something they don't know how to face directly. And understanding that doesn't excuse the behavior. But it does help explain it, because human behavior is often less about what people do and more about why they do it. One of the hidden costs of chronic lying is that it creates two realities. The first reality is the person's actual life. The second is the life they present to everyone else. At first, the gap between those realities may be small. A few exaggerations, a few omissions, a few carefully edited stories. But over time, the gap often grows. The more a person lies, the more they must protect previous lies. One false story requires another, and then another. Eventually, maintaining the illusion becomes a full-time job. Many pathological liars spend enormous mental energy managing appearances. Not because they enjoy it, but because the truth has become increasingly difficult to reveal. The longer a lie exists, the more painful honesty becomes. Most people imagine pathological liars as manipulative masterminds, but fear is often a much bigger factor than manipulation. Fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, fear of being seen as ordinary, fear of disappointment. For some people, lying becomes a shield, a way to avoid experiences that feel emotionally unbearable. Instead of saying, "I failed," they create a different story. Instead of saying, "I was hurt," they pretend they never cared. Instead of admitting insecurity, they construct confidence. The lie protects the person from an uncomfortable truth, at least temporarily. Many lies are not random. They often reveal something important. Not who the person is, but who they wish they were. A person who constantly exaggerates success may be desperate to feel respected. Someone who invents dramatic stories may crave significance. Someone who lies about relationships may fear loneliness. In a strange way, lies sometimes reveal hidden desires more clearly than the truth. If you pay attention to what a person repeatedly lies about, you often discover what matters most to them. Every person manages impressions to some degree. We all present different versions of ourselves depending on the situation. But pathological liars take this process much further. Their focus shifts away from reality and toward perception. The question stops being, "What is true?" and becomes, "What will make me look better?" Over time, this mindset can become automatic. The person's identity becomes increasingly dependent on how others see them. And when approval becomes addictive, authenticity often disappears. Many people assume they would never be deceived. But intelligence alone offers surprisingly little protection. In fact, highly intelligent people can sometimes be easier to manipulate. Because they look for complex explanations, they give others the benefit of the doubt. They assume consistency. And pathological liars often exploit exactly those assumptions. The most convincing lies are usually not outrageous. They are just believable enough, close enough to reality, close enough to the truth. That's what makes them dangerous. Trust rarely disappears all at once. It erodes gradually. A contradiction here, an inconsistency there, a detail that doesn't quite fit. At first, people ignore these signs. Then they begin questioning, then checking, then doubting. Eventually, every statement becomes suspect. And when trust collapses, it is often difficult to rebuild because trust depends on predictability, and pathological lying destroys predictability. Perhaps the greatest irony is that many chronic liars desperately want connection. Yet their behavior makes genuine connection impossible. Real intimacy requires honesty, vulnerability, authenticity. But if people are constantly interacting with a manufactured version of someone, they can never truly know that person. The liar receives attention, validation, approval, but often remains deeply lonely because the approval is directed toward a character, not the real individual underneath. The hardest truth about pathological lying is this: the lie is rarely the real problem. The lie is often a symptom of fear, shame, insecurity, unresolved pain, or an identity built around avoiding uncomfortable realities. This doesn't excuse the damage. People can be deeply hurt by deception. Trust can be destroyed. Relationships can end. But understanding the psychology behind the behavior helps explain why it persists. Because human beings rarely repeat harmful behaviors for no reason. Even destructive patterns usually serve a psychological purpose, and until that purpose is understood, the behavior often continues. When we think about lying, we usually imagine deception directed at other people. But some of the most powerful lies are internal. People lie to themselves every day. They tell themselves they're happy in relationships that make them miserable. They convince themselves they don't care when they do. They insist they're in control when they clearly aren't. And unlike ordinary lies, self-deception is difficult to recognize. Because the person is both the storyteller and the audience, the mind has an extraordinary ability to protect itself from uncomfortable truths, sometimes without conscious awareness. In many cases, pathological lying doesn't begin with lying to others. It begins with lying to oneself. Imagine pretending to be someone long enough. At first, it's an act, a performance, a carefully constructed image. But after years of repetition, something strange can happen. The performance starts feeling real. The mask becomes familiar, comfortable, safe. And eventually the person may struggle to remember where the act ends and their authentic self begins. This is one reason chronic liars often appear surprisingly convincing. They're not always acting. They're living inside a version of reality they've helped create. There is another form of deception that deserves attention: gaslighting. Gaslighting occurs when someone repeatedly manipulates another person's perception of reality. The goal is not simply to tell a lie. The goal is to make someone doubt themselves, their memory, their judgment, their experiences. Over time, the victim begins to question their own mind. Maybe I'm remembering it wrong. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it never happened. This is what makes gaslighting so psychologically damaging. The victim loses confidence in their own perception. And when people stop trusting themselves, they become easier to control. From the outside, this can be difficult to understand. Why would someone remain in a relationship with a person who lies constantly? The answer is rarely simple. Sometimes there is hope that the person will change. Sometimes there is emotional attachment. Sometimes there is fear of being alone. And sometimes the lies appear gradually, not all at once. A small deception today, a larger one tomorrow, a pattern that only becomes obvious after years. Human beings adapt surprisingly well to unhealthy situations, especially when those situations develop slowly. One of the most fascinating discoveries in psychology is that people often judge truthfulness based on confidence, not accuracy, confidence. A person who speaks with certainty appears believable, even when they're completely wrong. Meanwhile, a truthful person who sounds uncertain may be doubted. This creates a dangerous illusion. Many chronic liars understand this instinctively. They don't persuade through evidence. They persuade through conviction. And because confidence feels persuasive, people often mistake it for honesty. Every lie creates tension, even if that tension isn't visible. The mind must remember different versions of reality, different stories, different explanations, different identities. Over time, this can become exhausting. Many chronic liars live with constant anxiety, fear of being exposed, fear of losing relationships, fear of losing the image they've worked so hard to create. The lie may provide short-term relief, but it often produces long-term stress. Honesty sounds simple, but psychologically, honesty requires courage. It requires accepting imperfections, mistakes, failures, weaknesses. It requires allowing other people to see us as we truly are. And for many individuals, that vulnerability feels terrifying. This is why honesty is not merely a moral choice, it's often an emotional challenge, a willingness to tolerate discomfort rather than escape it. Perhaps the greatest paradox of pathological lying is this. The behavior often begins as a way to protect oneself, to avoid shame, avoid rejection, avoid pain. Yet over time, the very thing meant to provide protection creates even more suffering. The lies become heavier, the relationships become weaker, the loneliness becomes deeper, and the person becomes increasingly disconnected from reality. The solution is rarely better deception. The solution is learning to face the truths that deception was hiding from in the first place. Most people think pathological lying is about fooling others, but often it's about escaping something within ourselves. Fear, shame, insecurity, the need for approval, the desire to become someone else. And while lies can change how the world sees us, they cannot change who we are underneath. Because eventually, every person faces the same question. What happens when the story you've been telling no longer matches reality? And perhaps that's the moment when real change finally becomes possible. If you enjoyed this exploration of human behavior, don't forget to subscribe for more psychology and social psychology content. And if this video made you think differently, let me know in the comments.